Give your teams focus of what you're shooting for, what good looks like, what personas, what use cases, and what segments are the most lucrative, that have the highest retention rates and our best ability to go and win. And that will drive success.
Welcome back to the SaaS Sales Performance Podcast, where we bring you insights from the brightest minds in sales, revenue growth, and market insights. And today we're thrilled to have James Tudway, who is Vice President at HG Insights, join us for another engaging conversation. So James is a strategic leader with a wealth of experience in leveraging data-driven insights to drive go-to-market success. And at HG Insights, James plays a critical role in helping businesses unlock the power of technology intelligence, enabling them to make smarter data-backed decisions and accelerate their revenue growth. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about a topic which is front of mind for many leaders in today's market, and that is focus. How do you focus? And most importantly, how do you then incentivize your team around that focus? So whether you're looking to boost your go-to-market strategy, improve your own sales performance, or understand the latest trends in the market, this episode is going to be packed with some valuable takeaways. So let's get started. And James, huge welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
James, the place that we always like to get started is a very quick introduction. So for those listening to this who haven't yet connected with yourself or worked with HG Insights, help us understand a little bit more about your journey into revenue leadership and how you ended up leading teams at HG.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I've worked in tech for 15 or so years, coming up from SDR through to AE, and pretty quickly got into leadership positions, all consistent within relatively small companies. So really enjoyed the startup to mid-sized journey across 3 different organizations, MBA, IT. Then we started a technology research division of a much larger public company, but it was really small. We took it to 0 to 5 million in a couple of years, learned a lot, then decided to go and start a company using the same insights, the same market positioning, and do it slightly differently. So we started a company called Pivotal IQ, little basement room in London that was a partner of HG. We relicensed their data as well as our own assets, and pretty quickly got that within 2 years up to 3 or 4 million revenue, at which point HG Insights, we needed them. They didn't have a sales function necessarily. They were a channel business. We didn't have any data analysts, data scientists, but had a strong sales engine that was growing quickly. So HG we merged with HG, and over the last 4 or 5 years have been on a journey growing 40% year on year through what were now, in hindsight, very favorable market conditions. We kind of were growing in an entrepreneurial way, maybe without focus, but we were getting away with it to some extent, and kind of took the company to 50 million revenue relatively quickly over that 3 or 4 years of period of time, and then hit a kind of that 50 million hole that everyone talks about. How did the plateau? So I run the global sales organization, but we've really looked at focus, hence the title of this podcast. How can we, when we had our first relatively flat year, wasn't the 40% that we used to, we had a slower growth year, what's holding us back? And what I've observed in my relatively short sales leadership, new leadership career, is when you're winning, you're not, and in hindsight looking back, I wasn't learning that much. You're looking at success patterns, but you're not necessarily investigating why stuff's not working, because a lot of it was working. It took a year, and when the market collapsed, COVID was a really good year for us, but 2002, it took that year for us to really look at what are the bottlenecks in our process, how focused are we, and what could we change, and how might that change results. And one of my biggest takeaways is you really do start learning when stuff doesn't eye open of the year. So hence why we'll kind of get into some of the focus areas that I've observed. But that's been a journey so far over a kind of 15-year period.
Amazing. And we were just discussing before the show recording today, both sides of the Atlantic, right?
Yeah, spent 3 years building out the US function. It was funny, on paper, we were a US headquartered company selling into US headquartered companies, predominantly West Coast because it's tech. But our sales team was 90% in London, hence Pivotal IQ's sales team that we're building out. So moved over 3 years ago, built out a really strong sales engine. We've got about 20, 25 sellers, 15 SDRs, big CS function now based in California, Santa Barbara, and remote as well. But decided to bring the family back after 3 really exciting, successful years back to the UK and kind of work on regrowing HG outside of just the US, but including the US now, get our global presence back on the grid and start to scale the company to the next level.
I love the point you made there, James, where you said that when you're winning, you perhaps don't learn as much as a leader. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned over that last 12-month period at a high level? I mean, give us an insight into maybe one or two that really stick out as lessons learned when the markets became more difficult.
It can be really hard to buy. One of my biggest observations is customers have all kinds of problems, but sometimes they either don't know they've got the problems or don't understand how to articulate and frame some of their problems and actually start to diagnose why they might have a revenue or pipeline challenge. So we've observed that across the market, and even within our own organization, sometimes it's hard to diagnose. My biggest lesson is you've really got to take the time to work collaboratively with cross-functional teams to understand why there might be bottlenecks, why they exist, where they exist, and what can be done to remove them. And do you want to prioritize removing them or live with those bottlenecks, knowing there's other priorities? So prioritization is key. Having open, honest discussions with your own team and cross-functional teams about what's working, what's not, making that visible, like you would performance manage reps, performance managing all different cross-functional teams to understand, is it a case that we're just not generating the demand in enough people on our website or views? Is it a problem with how our SDRs convert those meetings? Is it a sales execution problem? We're creating demand, but we can't convert it. So figure out what metrics you want to measure them, and hold each other accountable for delivering against them. And when stuff doesn't work, get ahead of it, not at a QBR, not at a board meeting, week by week, what's working, what's not. And that's the kind of approach that we've really pivoted to. We have almost a weekly QBR. Don't create tons of work that doesn't feel like it's moving the business forward. Have it visible, have it observable, so anyone can question, I wonder why that's not working in a way that it should do. What could you or a cross-functional team or a member of your team do to change that result? Because that leading indicator is starting to suggest in 3 weeks that problem's going to be 5x the size. All of a sudden, we've got a pipeline gap. One other quick, bring it back to focus. It's really easy to overcomplicate selling, which therefore leads to overcomplication of buying. And one of the problems we had as an organization is we can serve 30 different use cases for 20 different personas, whether that be sizing your markets. We can help a head of corporate strategy or head of go-to-market understand which markets have the biggest opportunity. We can help a RevOps leader then build a territory that aligns to that market opportunity and plays on competitor strengths or weaknesses. We can help a demand gen take out a certain competitor in a certain market. We can help an account rep build world-class account plan and understand where their opportunity is, which technology is used by which departments, how long have they been there. That sounds great on paper, right? But it's really hard to sell, and it's really hard to buy because not everyone's prioritizing all of those use cases at any one moment. They're often trying to prioritize one or two critical use cases that are impacting their ability to build pipeline or their ability to retain reps. So the lack of focus that we had, that maybe was one of the reasons why we had been successful to get to 50 million, was one of the reasons that was holding us back as we were really starting to grow and mature as an organization. We can't market to every persona for every problem. Not every customer wants to buy all those use cases. And in fact, we're having customers saying, I actually don't need that segment of HG right now. Can I remove it and come back to it when I do need it in 6 months? So we've really honed our focus, and we can kind of dive into that as this goes on. But give your teams focus of what you're shooting for, what good looks like, what personas, what use cases, in what segments are the most lucrative, that have the highest retention rates and our best ability to go and win. And that will drive success.
Those are some amazing learnings. And yeah, it's your point around learning far more from when the proverbial shit hits the fan, how you become much more data driven as an organization. And there's been so much talk in the industry about how you pivot towards that and actually use those leading indicators to become much more objective in how you lead your organizations. But it's a difficult journey to go on, right? When up until now, it's just been a kind of upward, that growth curve's been up and to the right, and everything's been rosy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's being compounded by a difficult market with AI, the rise of AI. Most CEOs are telling their organization to be data driven and AI ready and adopt. But the ability to go from that nice desire to the reality is so difficult unless you are really focused on solving problems. And we see that with the adoption of AI, we see that with the adoption of data and insights. Unless you are trying to solve a problem, no one needs more data. In fact, you ask any customer of HG or any organization, do you need more data? Absolutely not. You need insights to help you solve problems. Now you're starting to speak the language of the customer. And we saw that in our own organization. We had no shortage of information about the health of our business, but we didn't know what we were looking for. We didn't know what we were trying to solve. And actually, when we started to peel back and prioritize, well, we have in this segment a churn issue, or in this segment, we have a much higher conversion rate. I wonder why. When you're winning, well, we can live with that churn rate because it's offset by the fact that another segment, it's much higher. But when you have to get focused and the market starts to downturn a little bit and you need to start really picking your bets and provocating certain markets that maybe have undiscovered need versus discover need, the need for real segmentation for us became crucial. Therefore, we had to make decisions around what problems are we trying to solve first, in what segments, and what resources do we put on that, and how do we measure if it's a success, and what would be the end result. A similar journey as anyone's trying to incorporate data into their AI strategy or an AI strategy. What problems are you trying to solve? How big is that problem? Is it worth investing in? Yes or no? What metrics are suffering? And if you're going to change, what needs to happen to change that? What metrics are you going to measure to see if it's been a success or not?
When we speak about focus, James, an organization like HG Insights, you mentioned you may have as many as, kind of 20 different problems that you're solving for a range of different personas. Help us understand, what does that journey look like when you sit down and decide you need to get better focus on that ICP? What actually happens? What does that process look like? How do you start unpacking that and talk us through that journey?
Yeah, it's a good one because it's very easy to say, let's look at our historic wins. And that was a mistake that many organizations made. But HG at first walked into the similar trap because we looked at our historic wins and it was kind of quite telling that large enterprise companies, we have a very high retention rate. We're good at landing logos. We've really worked from the top down. We should go and approach that market and really focus on it. But what it doesn't tell you is that we might have been really successful in that segment of the market because the market was coming towards us, was mature, was data savvy, was data ready, had forward-looking visionary CROs or CMOs or heads of go-to-market, essentially the low-hanging fruit. And what remains in that segment is what might be deemed as laggard organizations that actually aren't incorporating data into a holistic go-to-market. They're not trying to use the same data set to size their markets. They are to build the territories and run the demand gen campaigns and struggle with these alignment issues. So we can spend a lot of time trying to convince them that they might have problems, but they don't yet really understand that or want to even accept they have problems. So what we did and what we advise all of our customers is to take a data-driven point of view and look at the market that remains. What are the signals in that market? Are we seeing elements of maturity in those market segments that would deem there's an opportunity there, or actually is it a case of educating, nurturing that market and focusing elsewhere? How much is left in the market? There aren't that many large organizations that don't work with HG. So SOM was actually relatively small in the large tech enterprise organization. We might have historically won there, but there's not a great deal left. So again, another element of how HG's customers use our assets is to understand what is our current addressable market? How much have we penetrated today? How much of that is good fitting? And of remains of your SOM, how much of that is a good fit, good score organizations that you should be struggling trying to sell to versus might struggle to? And that might dictate, is enterprise really the right bet to place based on what's left? Or should it be more of a mid-size or mid-enterprise? And we made some of those decisions by looking at what was remaining in each segment. And I've got a real focus now of looking at who our future customers could be, not just who our past customers that got us to 50. And that's been a real bit of a game changer in our ability to better prioritize where to go and hunt. And we're starting to see, is we talked very briefly before, some of the focus that we brought in 6 months ago is showing not just green shoots, but actually significant branches of growth that we hadn't even predicted we could get from segments of the market that we'd under penetrated before that have high, good fit scoring accounts for HG using our own data that are now converting at a much higher rate than what might be deemed as the laggard enterprises that hadn't bought for 4 or 5 years that just simply weren't converting because they weren't ready or ripe or mature or wanted to go on a data-driven transformation journey.
Super interesting. I guess you folks at HD have a little bit of an unfair advantage given that the solution that you sell to the market. Who specifically, James, from an HG Insights perspective, was leading that process? Was it a collaboration between revenue leadership and your RevOps colleagues, as an example?
Yeah, it was a, in all honesty, it was a full exec team. So our CEO, our head of business operations, head of revenue operations, sales leadership team, all came together with product leadership, because again, we might choose a segment and the product team might push me and say, well, let's assess, do we have something that a product that can address that market effectively? So it was a cross-functional effort. We did on-sites together in person in California, in London, over several different sessions. There was a perspective that was brought in, a hypothesis. Here's what we believe our ICP is by segment and how much market there is left. And we would come out of 2 days of back and forth debate, really open discussions. And okay, we need to repivot. There's new information. On the next session, we're going to reassess, is that really the right segmentation? We're pressure testing everything to the absolute nth degree, because some of these decisions are too important to make and not fully understand the opportunity. I think belief and hope has been a strategy for many organizations. And when we were growing, there were some years that I looked at the number and said, I just believe we can get there, but I don't actually know. That's now changed. We're now looking at our segments to say, I know there's a market opportunity and there is enough there. We can build capacity. We can put reps on that segment. We have enough for 5 reps because we have X amount of good scoring accounts that could all yield X amount of revenue. Therefore, that is 5 territories versus let's hope there's 5 territories and let's maybe oversubscribe it and get 10 sellers and see what we can get. The market is shifting a lot. HG might have not been as mature as some organizations that were doing this 4 or 5 years ago, but we've reached that growth stage where everything is calculated and every risk is known and is visible and can be measured and sized. Here's the size of that opportunity. If we're going to go invest and put marketing and sales dollars, here's what we believe our return can be.
Starts to sound a hell of a lot more predictable and repeatable.
Yeah. And again, you ask an interesting question. Who's involved? Well, we're 50 to 60 million revenue. We're quite a lean organization, but that's the CEO sat on every meeting, being part of it, hearing it. Might not be leading every meeting, but the revenue leaders all together with the product and exec team debating, having open conversations, which when we were growing up, those conversations weren't always happening because they weren't necessarily needed. The need for focus wasn't always visible or top of mind because we're continuing to grow, because the market might be coming towards us. As soon as the market begins, you enter a downturn. My experience, still, I'm young, got a lot to learn, but as soon as the market enters that type of downturn, focus and open and honest, transparent conversations about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities of the business and go-to-market team have to be front and center. And unless you have insights driving those conversations, you can spend hours going around in circles. And I've been in those meetings. I'm sure we all have. Where should we invest our resources? Unless you have not just data, because sometimes data can be conflicting, can tell a different story. Unless you have insights that every department trusts and can buy into and use as a baseline, very hard to make decisions, especially when you know these decisions are ultimately going to impact the growth and health of the business over the next 1 or 2 years, because you're going to invest product, go-to-market resources and product dollars into those decisions.
Something you touched upon briefly there, James, when you were talking about using data to optimize your strategy, become much more focused and then move yourself towards a position where you can actually start to decide how many reps you're going to assign to specific territories and segments based on that exercise that you've been through. Something we're hearing a lot of in the market right now are challenges from customers with regards to the profile of rep that they have within their organization. So you undergo this transformation. There may be some evolution in your ICP. How are you thinking about that evolving profile of seller and what it takes to be successful given the renewed focus you've got on your ICP?
It's a good question. I think we have previously had sellers that weren't as focused as they need to be. So they would sell across multiple different segments, mid-market, commercial, enterprise, doing all types of deals, all types of personas for all types of use cases, and sometimes even doing a blend of new plus expansion with a small renewal book. I think genuinely the days of that type of, unless you are a startup, which HG was. So I can understand why we operated in that model, but we've certainly seen the modern world of enterprise selling for mid-size organizations completely focus the reps, have them new logo or renewal expansion, have them sat in a segment that they can go and do replica sales, selling to a single or multiple, but a small group of personas, a very specific use case that you have a market message that supports, you have a gap in the market, that link between the Gartner and IDC and the Zoom infos, your tactical data and your go-to-market planning. There's a gap there. So heads of go-to-market, really where we're focusing in certain size companies where you have a similar pattern. Not every company is the same, but if you score your accounts effectively, they have a similar level of maturity. Therefore, their needs, we believe, we need to understand the customer and probe and come with a perspective. We work with similar organizations of similar size that have a similar technology stack, for example, and a similar level of data sophistication maturity, and they're struggling with these types of problems. What are the bottlenecks you're seeing? And we're seeing that focus is really allowing our reps to help customers because they have just come off the phone with a very similar organization and just learning the patterns and almost helping educate the market on what is an emerging trend that is to be insight ready in order to be AI ready. And companies want to get there, but it's a difficult journey. So yeah, the focus that brings by having the segment, the role, persona, the use case clearly defined, clearly supported. And again, who's involved in this? To your question earlier, our RevOps leaders know our use cases and personas better as well as any of the reps. So the back to the kind of question of the profile of a rep, these have to be highly cross-functional, highly skilled. We've really invested in development, and Matt will say, keep doing that. And there's more that you hubs could be doing with HG, absolutely. But invest in the right development, ensure you've got clear understanding of the skill sets and gaps they might have. They've got to be technically adept. They've got to be customer focused. They really have to understand the market that they're playing in and be able to come with a perspective and provoke customers. They're often part of a transformational journey that is not easy, and it involves egos within the customer. It involves actually customers going back to their superiors, maybe even their boss, and saying, what we've been doing for years is not as effective as maybe we thought it is, or is not effective in the new world. I need money to go and invest in change, but the result of this will be X, Y, Z. That's a really difficult conversation. Our profile of seller, and I believe the kind of future seller is one that can use AI to cut through a lot of the time spent to prep, come with a perspective, be able to translate between data, the data layer, data scientists, the execution layer, sales, marketing, and the C-suite who ultimately have the money to invest, but don't necessarily own the problem. Their business has the problem. The owners of the problem in the execution or the data layer. They have to be able to translate these different layers. It's a highly skilled job. It involves empathy and ability to understand and map out companies. But again, with the message around focus, we're giving our reps a smaller number of accounts to go hunting and be successful. Prioritize the customers that really have the biggest upside and potential and the right for them. Stop spending time trying to uncover need, use marketing to go and nurture these accounts and focus on a much smaller group of accounts that you can know intimately. Our reps could write a thesis of any of their customers or prospects. It's that close. They really have mapped out the entire organization and are part of a transformational journey and are building that partnership versus trying to sell something transactional that they step away from.
Really insightful, and definitely backs up the themes that we're hearing from the market more broadly, James. And it feels like there's much more of a shift happening in the market right now towards successful sellers of today and the future being much more consultative. The other element of this that is quite interesting is, given all of the investments in product that are going into building out the AI roadmap, it feels like most sellers working in the broader technology space are going to have to adjust to a whole new portfolio of products and features that they're going to have to go to market and effectively, again, like you said, simplify for that focused ICP. So it's going to be super interesting to see how that constant profile evolution happens.
Yeah. And new and emerging personas owning the sales and marketing technology stack. More and more, the role of the chief data officer, a CIO is becoming more prominent. And as an organization 2 years ago, we had very few conversations with the CIO because the go-to-market tech stack was kind of sat elsewhere. SaaS applications that were managed, overseen, but managed elsewhere. More and more as companies are starting to build out their data fabric and realize they have the product themselves, which is the data, that they can then put their own LLMs over and build their own agents. More and more, every company is becoming a product company because they have the heart of that product is their own first party data, where HG is playing a more significant role. The CIO is now that you have understood the value of all of your first party data, that you can look backwards. In order to look forwards, you need best in class third party data to start to better predict your future movement. So the CIO is becoming a really interesting persona. But again, 2 years ago, we weren't having many conversations, so didn't necessarily understand and speak the same language. And more, we're working closely with CIOs to build out that unified data fabric that can then be, you can deliver an internal product, which might be a go-to-market market planning tool. It might be a account 360 tool that can be used by different go-to-market teams. But we're seeing the CIO emerging as a really interesting role that we still need to continue to understand and support, and understand the best we can support.
Super interesting. And are you seeing that CIO ownership happen at a certain stage of company, James?
It really does vary, and it's still emerging. Some very large organizations, the CIO and MDM team for the last couple of years have owned this type of initiative. Similar sized organization, CIO is far removed from this type of process. Just as anything, as it emerges, can be spotting the patterns in clusters can be quite difficult because often there isn't a great deal of consistency in patterns. But we are noticing smaller companies adopting much more of a data-driven strategy early on in their growth. And some of the larger organizations have got a lot of technical debt they have to pay down in order to transform. But we're seeing a lot of agile, a lot of HG's former customers taking bigger roles in smaller companies and prioritizing their go-to-market data fabric and ensuring they've built the layers of firmographic, technographic data to order make decisions at every level across the organization. But we're seeing that emerging earlier. Whether that's at the CIO is not always clear, but it's certainly happening in smaller organizations. The CIO is becoming, or the chief data officer is playing a much more critical role in the go-to-market data fabric.
Super interesting. James, I think it's clear based on today's conversation, the importance of focus. And, this is a topic that we could, I'm sure, spend another 5 hours plus chewing the fat on, but super interesting hearing the journey that you've been on leading the teams at HG Insights over the last 12 months. And I think, as we were discussing, all customers are important, but some customers are more important than others, and establishing that renewed focus is going to be so key moving forwards.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And as global uncertainty continues, really understanding your great customers and your great potential customers is becoming more and more important. And let's see how this evolves. It's exciting, but it's going to be an interesting year. I'm really interested when I speak with peers, yourself, how's business? What are you seeing as emerging patterns? And I think every day the market seems to evolve another step with AI continuing to evolve at such high pace. It is really interesting to see where this year will take us and what 2026 will look like. It could be a world that is unrecognizable from today. But great leaders will always play a really important role in establishing how go-to-market teams operate effectively, and having data at the heart of that, having trusted data that all teams can collaborate from and make decisions right away from where to allocate go-to-market resources down to the rep level is going to become more and more important. How you address those data sets, I guess, is the big question that's out there today. Is it internally build a product? Is it go external and buy a product? And they're all kind of decisions that I'm really got a keen eye on to see how they emerge over the next 12 months.
Awesome. James, thanks so much for coming on the show today, and really looking forward to seeing how HG Insights continues to play a role in this future that we're all on the front lines building. But thanks so much for your time today.
Great. Thanks, Matt.